Hello there, I'm Serfancy, and in this tutorial you can learn how to get started with Niagara, which is new VFX system in Unreal Engine. Well, let's not waste your time and get to it. Well, first of all, let's make sure that you have version of Unreal Engine that supports it, which means everything from 4.25 above. So if you have 4.25 or higher, it should work. So now let's go into Edit and Plugins, and let's make sure that you have enabled everything that has anything to do with Niagara. So write here Niagara into search bar and make sure you are in built-in. And if you look here, you need to have enabled Chaos Niagara, Niagara, and Niagara Extras. These two are the most important, but let's make sure that we enable all three of them. You will probably need to restart the project. Alright, so now when we right click and click on FX, we have here few new stuff. Well, most important are Niagara Emitter and Niagara System. That's what we are going to talk about today. If you want just simple description, Niagara Emitter is basically sets of particles of little sprites that can have different velocity and different movement to them, and at the end you can use them as templates and create different effects out of each emitter. And what Niagara System is a particle system that you can put in the game, which is built out of Niagara emitters. So right now I will create just Niagara System, and you will get this menu, which is to create new system from either selected emitters and from template, etc. Or you can of course copy previous one and or create the empty one. If I was creating a normal effect, I would probably start with empty one or with a new system from selected emitters. I probably wouldn't use new system from template. That's if you want something quite specific from here. So if you click on new system from selected emitters and click on next, now you can take one of these Niagara emitters and put them into your Niagara system. And right now I will actually select all of them because I want to demonstrate what each of them does. So you can just double click on them and put all of them in there. I probably don't need to put that empty one, which is just empty as you would expect. So let's delete that one and add here others. You can also see that I have here non-template emitters, which you probably don't, and these are emitters that I have created previously. So let's finish it and create Niagara System. And let's call it just NS as Niagara System _ test. Alright, let's open it. Now this may seem a bit scary from the start, but it's actually very similar to Blueprint, so you will get your hand around it quite quickly. So right now you can see that I have here a bit of a mess because I have added all these emitters. So what I will do is to disable all of these except the first one, directional burst, and by clicking on this little arrow. Now when we have it a bit calmer, let's look at these setups. So first of all, most important is probably preview. That will show you how your effect looks like, and you can of course change here a few stuff, which is completely same as you would do here in the game. So I will not really go into that. Then you can see this system overview, which is same as with blueprints, as I said previously. It's basically just to move these around and select between different emitters, because most important is probably this selection that will let you change parameters within these emitters. We will get into it in the moment. And another thing is of course timeline. That's just regular timeline as you would do with any animation where you have time and how that particle is changing across that time. So let's move it all around a bit. Let's move that guy here and look at our directional burst, because with that one we will demonstrate all these setups. You can also quickly look at our Niagara System setup, where if you change something here it will influence all these emitters. So let's stop procrastinating and get our directional burst. So if I slowly move this timeline and zoom in, just with my mouse wheel, you can see that what it does is just create a bunch of particles and shoot them at some way, that way. So let's see how this emitter does what it does. So what you probably would want to start with is just right clicking on it and renaming it to something you would want. Probably not this, but I will leave it to you. Now let's kind of zoom out and look at these categories. We have here emitter setting, emitter spawn, emitter update, and then basically the same thing with particle. And of course some render and add event handler. We will ignore event handler for now, and let's start actually from down because it will be probably easier. Render is basically what this particle will use and what will show out to the player. Usually you would probably have it set to sprite renderer, which is right now set to our material, and our material is currently a default sprite material, which is just this little dot that you can see here. Sometimes you will want to change it to animation, for example with fire, which I can actually show you right here, because I have already created tutorials for that. So if you would be interested in watching that, You have of course links somewhere in description, and I would actually recommend you to do that. I have created other tutorials for Niagara where you can create specific effects, and it will really help you to remember all this stuff that I will talk about today. Today it will be just an overview of everything. So back in Niagara system, usually you wouldn't change here anything except the velocity aligned or facing mode. You can change where it will face. Usually let's set it to face in camera, which basically means that if it's one-sided, it will always rotate. As you can see right now, it's rotating. So it faces the player or the camera of the player. And then alignment is basically where its front and back it is. If you set it to velocity align, then it will be always headed the way it's flying or where you send it with your velocity. You can add here different types of renderers, for example light renderer, which is quite expensive, so be careful with that. And you can make it quite shiny. Let's actually demonstrate it all in the game. I can put that system right here. And you can see that pretty much nothing happened. So if I reset it, and you can see that there is a bit of a light going off once you shoot it out. What I can do, of course, is to increase that radius scale. Let's set it to 50. Oh, you know what? Let's do 500, what it will do. But now if I reset it, you can see that basically outshines everything. I wouldn't use it. It's quite expensive. Be careful with that, especially if you are working with a lot of particles. You can of course add here also mesh renderer. That can be quite interesting because you can add here any static mesh you wish. So for example, let's add here, I don't know, shape cylinder. Cute, what it will look like. It will probably spawn cylinders, and they will be huge. If I could, yep, they are very huge. So what I can do is to find here scale and change it, but I won't do that now because we will get into scale later. So let's just delete mesh renderer for now and get to actually interesting stuff, which is our emitter spawn update, and that's everything. It's just spawn update. So as the name suggests, spawns is what happens when the particle will be spawned. Well, in case if you are talking about particle spawn. If you are talking about emitter spawn, is what will happen when our emitter will be spawned. You probably won't change anything here. I don't think I have ever used it. But in case that you want something to happen before any particle will spawn, at the moment where our emitter will spawn, you can probably do that here. With particle spawn, you will change quite a lot of things, and I will get into that in a moment. I just want to briefly talk about emitter update and particle update. And the difference between spawn and update is that update is happening through the life of this particle several lot of times. Good example would be with velocity. On particle spawn, you would want to add some velocity to throw it somewhere, put that impulse that will shoot it somewhere, and then throughout the life of that particle, you want to add gravity force, as it is done here, where it will slowly fall down. Because the gravity will have to have effect throughout the whole life of that particle, and that velocity that will shoot it out you need only on start of its life. Then you don't really care if it does anything. Let's just quickly talk about emitter properties, and the only thing you really need to care about here is this simulation target, and that's if you are rendering that particle on CPU or GPU. It should be better for you to render everything on GPU if you can, because usually GPU is much stronger than CPU, and CPU has much more stuff to take care of. But for example, you cannot render light on GPU, etc, etc. And the other thing is that if you would want to do that on GPU, you would also have to create here fixed bounds and make sure that your particle will be inside those bounds. That will basically just make sure that your particles won't go outside of specified area. And I don't really want to take care of that, so let's just leave it on CPU. Now, as I said, on emitter spawn, we won't really talk about that. There is nothing really interesting for now. So let's go into emitter update. The important thing here is basically our loop behavior. What the loop behavior is to set up if you want that particle to spawn it multiple times, where you can just set up here how many times you want it to do. Let's say that I want to do it 5 times. And the loop duration, which is time between each bursts, will be, let's say 0.2, so it will be quite fast. And we'll do something like that. Or you can do it only once, pretty handful with explosion. Or you, of course, if you want, you can switch it to infinite, and then you would probably need to change loop duration. But right now it will just shoot forever until you destroy or kill that system. But let's say that I want to have here a longer time, so let's switch loop duration to 1.5. As you can see, it always waits 1.5 seconds between each burst. Another thing in particle update is to set up how many particles you want to spawn. And this time I'm using spawn burst instantaneous, that's what it was originally named for. And you can usually set up here how much time it will take to spawn it and how many particles you want. Right now it's set to 75, so let's do 750. If you want to test something, usually it's better to add or decrease 0. And you can see there is 100 times more of them. There are several different kinds of spawns. A lot of them you can see right here or throughout this. Just quickly, if you click on this little plus and put here spawn, you can add here spawn burst instantaneous. You can set up, for example, spawn per frame, which is every frame it will spawn certain amount of particles, or usually spawn rate is your best case, and that will just spawn them continuously on however you set it up. You can combine them, of course. Let's say that I want to disable spawn burst and set spawn rate to 50, and now it's shooting them like crazy. Look at that. Now let's look into particle spawn. That's what happens when our particle is spawned. You always have to have here initiate particle, where you will set up how long that particle should live. Right now it's between 0.8 and 1.75 seconds. And let's say that I don't want it. I want to have it only as one float. So let's click on this, and by default you can see it like one float. It will live only for 1 second. And of course I have to enable a spawn burst again. And let's say that I changed my mind. I want to change it back to back to that range. So let's click on this little arrow and put here uniform ranged float. That will let us do that again. And I want to have it between 1 and 2 seconds. If you are working with velocity, which you usually will be working with velocity with particles, you probably need to take care about mass. That's basically how heavy it is as with any other particle or any other object in Unreal Engine. And what's more important is probably this color, because now you can set up how that particle should look like actually. Let's say I want to change it to red, but to be honest, you a lot of times change color in the update. Just be aware that if you are changing color in particle update, it will override this initiate particle color. And let's say that I want it to shine, and there is quite a good tip. If you want it to outshine some things, outshine some light, you need to put this number up above 1. So let's set it to 50, and you can see that it's outshining anything. Cool. Here in our sprite attributes is sprite size. Let's say that I want to have them a bit bigger. Right now, if I zoom in, each of them has size of 10 by 10. And I can of course put here another range and let the computer randomly choose between different values, but let's just leave it on one number. So I want its x to be about 8 and y, let's do 15. I want to have them really long. Alright, another thing that you will probably add on particle spawn is some velocity. Right here you can see velocity in cone, and right here you can actually even see that cone. If you look at it, let's actually delete that. And it will just spawn them, and they will be on one place because they don't have any velocity. Oh, they are falling down, and that's because we have here gravity force. So let's just disable that in our particle update. We'll get to it in the moment. So let's add our own velocity to it. Click on this little plus, and let's just put here velocity. And we have here different kinds of velocity we can add. Velocity from point, which is basically just one point from which that velocity can go any direction you set. Velocity in cone, which is what you have seen. That's good if you are making tornado or you want it to go in general direction of something. Inherit velocity if you want to take that velocity from somewhere else. And vortex velocity if you want to go crazy all around, etc. You probably know how it looks vertex. And you can also sometimes use a rotational velocity if you want it to spin around. So let's say that I want to add velocity, just add velocity. And here, let's say that I want it to go up, which means that I will take Z, and let's try 200. But you can see that they are all traveling at the same speed. It's still spawning 750 of them, but they are all at the same place. So what I will do is again randomize it. Usually if you want to make it look better, randomize it. That will fix everything. So let's put here a random ranged vector and set everything to 0, 0 and minimum between 150 to 250. You can see how it's choosing that laser. We've basically created laser gun, look at that. Alright, the problem now is that it's spawning all on one place, and that's something I will also fix here in particle spawn. So let's add here location, and you can set up at what location it will spawn. I would usually use sphere location, but let's be a bit more adventurous today. So let's use, for example, box location, and you can see that it's already doing its thing. You can set how big that box will be, and it will spawn somewhere on its place. You know what, it's moving a bit too fast right now, so I will... the problem is that I hadn't set it to 250 but 2500. That may be a bit of a problem. Let's take box location and set it to 60 by 60 and Z was leave to 80. And we can increase a number of particles to 1000. It looks kind of bad because they have same lifetime. Now, of course, box location is kind of boring, so let's click on another button and put here plus, let's do cylinder location. It should spawn as a cylinder. It's kind of big cylinder, so let's decrease it, height set to 30 and radius to about 50. And here we go. We have a random cylinder. But you of course want to randomize it somehow, and that's something you could do in particle update, but since we are here in particle spawn, let's add here velocity in cone. That would be cool, but let's add a rotational velocity. We want it to move. If you have error like that, it's because you have put it somewhere where it doesn't belong. So if you fix that issue, you can see that will apply initial forces and fix the problem you have. Let's say that I want it in X and Y and about 150 and 20, what it will do. And part of it is starting to rotate at the start, as you can see. Now we want to actually do something more interesting with it. For that, let's go into our particle update. And first of all, let's enable again our gravity force, because on the start it's usually velocity, but right here in particle update, you can also add here force. You have here a whole category forces, and what you can do is to add here acceleration force, which basically means how longer it lives, the faster it goes. Gravity force, which is what we have here. Attraction force, that it will go from one particle to another. But I want to kind of randomize it, so let's add here find force. Again, fix issue, we'll put it above this one, and right now it doesn't do anything because we don't have here any velocity on any axis. So let's randomize it. So put here uniform ranged vector and go between 1 on each axis to about 50 to each axis, and just see what it does. And it's falling down because of our gravity force, so let's lower our gravity force. It's set to Z minus 980, which is pretty much Earth gravity. That's basically the most realistic gravity you have, but we don't want that. No one wants realism in games, right? So let's put here minus 120. And you can see that wind is starting to do something with that. Let's put it stronger. Wind speed scale, it's set to 100. Oh, here we go, look at that. That was way too much. Let's try 10. And that's something. That looks actually kinda cool. I didn't expect that good result. It's kinda like that scene from Kung Fu Panda with Ogway going slowly dying in the... That's a question. Did he die? Let me know in comments if you think that he died there. This is not gonna be game development channel, it's gonna be philosophy channel. That would be cool. Let's also look at other things that we have in our particle update. And that's of course our drag, which is another force. You can see it with this orange button as well. And what it does is basically pull all these particles together. If I would decrease it to 0.1, they won't stay in one place as much as they did before, and it will be actually harder for them right now to form that shape that it had on the start. And you can see that here. But if I increase it, they can be pulled together way too much, as you can see, something like that. Not really good. So let's try 0.7, something like that. And then what you can do here is of course change all these previous parameters of our particle. Right here you can see how it is set up with scale color. And I will just delete it and do it from the start so you can know how to do it with other parameters. So let's click on plus and put here color. I want to change color of it. And right now you can see that will be white, and as I said before, you can see that I have overwritten with our particle update how our color of our particle looks like on the start. So first of all, what I want to do is to turn it into curve, because curves are quite useful when working with particles. So you can see that I have here color from curve. Let's click on that, and what it basically did is changing our alpha, so you can see that particle is slowly disappearing. If you move it, it will be visible for a longer time, something like that. Yep. And you can set by clicking here, I have added different colors. So let's click on this one. Oh, actually, that's opacity, sorry. Right here on the upper part, you have color. So let's click on this one and change that color. And I want to do about 50 on red, 1 on green, and 3 on blue. But that's not everything. I also wanted to change that color. So let's click somewhere here and add here color. What it should do now is to whiten out. Oh, it doesn't. So let's put it here and change it from this red. Let's change here red to 0, blue, green to 0, and blue to 50. But you can see that it goes from that original red throughout pink to something bluish through this. And you can see if I move it around a bit. Let's say that I want to move it here and also move our alpha and add here another color, that pink one. I can work with the transition. If you will be a bit more clever and work with lifetime, you can basically combine these particles. And as you can see, a bit over here, at one moment they are at the same time, some of them are blue and some of them are pink. If you work cleverly with a lifetime, you will achieve something like that. And another thing that I would like to demonstrate with curves is actually changing its scale. It's the same thing as we did here in particle spawn. So what I will do is to take sprite size, scale sprite size, add it here, and you can see by default it's set to 111. It's cool. But right now I want to turn it into one float. So put here float. That means it will be on the one number, so it will follow its ratio and put it into our curve. Float from curve. And now what I want to do here is to make it bigger somewhere around times 0.5 and then make it smaller again on 1. So, and for that, and exactly for that we have this float. So you can of course move it down here. So let's right click and add here key. And as I said on time 0.5, I want it to have value of 2. So it will be 2 times as big as it was when it was created. And now just zoom out. And let's add here another one, and let's say that I want it to scale up really fast. So let's add here another key and move it somewhere here, so it will be steeper, and then another key that will move it much faster down. Then select all of them, right click and switch it to auto. Now let's see what it does. You can see that it starts small, then it grows much bigger. It will be easier to look closer. And then when it's close to end of its life, it will grow down, which you can see nicely demonstrated on this curve. And you can use curves for anything. They are actually really powerful, so definitely have a fun with them and experiment with it. That's basically everything you need to know for these emitters, and honestly everything you need to know for Niagara as far. I can tell you something about these other presets and these other emitters, but honestly I have talked pretty much about that throughout this emitter. And if you want to learn about how you would use different forces and different velocities at different parameters from these emitters, definitely watch these other tutorials. There is tutorial for explosion, something like that, how to set up its scale, how to set up these collisions with ground, etc. Then tutorial for smoke, how to set up these custom parameters that you can see right on the side, smoke amount to 50. And let's change its smoke color to pinkish. You can do all that in Blueprint. This is set up with custom user parameters. You can learn that in any of these free tutorials, so I won't really go into that now. Now I know that I imported it here, it was kind of a mistake. I have actually already talked about all of them right here, and I don't want to waste your time. If you want to create something specific, you can watch tutorials down below in the description. And that's about it. I hope that you learned something here. Well, Sir Fancy out.